Hello, and welcome to Teacup For One. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees. Now, in the past, this show has been me recounting my adventures visiting the Walt Disney World Resort, but I am slowly running out of vacation footage, and here we are. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about one of the world's most beloved stories while I drink beverages out of this cup, which may or may not be tea. The story we're going to be discussing today is... Like R2 said, today we are going to be talking about one of the world's most beloved stories, Cinderella.
Oh, Cinderella!
The first recorded Cinderella story dates all the way back to ancient Greece, because of course it does. All of the great stories come from ancient Greece, except for the ones that don't. The great Greek geographer Strabo recorded a story called Rhodophis. In that story, a woman takes off her shoes so that she can take a bath, a bird picks up the shoe, drops it in the lap of a king, the king falls in love with the shoe more than the woman, and then he decides that he needs to find the woman who owns the shoe, and he does, and then he marries her. Fast forward approximately 860 years, and now we are in the beautiful land of China. Notable storyteller Zhuang Chenxi notated a story called Yaxian. This was a Cinderella story, but it was the first time in recorded history that the element of the stepfamily became a major plot point and a major conflict. The role of the stepfamily in Chenxi's edition is a bit different than what we're familiar with. In his version of the story, the stepfamily kills a fish that's the reincarnated spirit of Cinderella's mother, and then she takes the bones of the dead fish and then utilizes the spirit of her mother through those bones. Then we need to fast forward almost another 860 years, the year 1697, at which point French storyteller Charles Perrault, and yes, I'm aware that I'm butchering all of these names, I'm so sorry, wrote his own version of the story called Cinderella ou la petite peinture de forêt. I gave up French after grade 9, I'm sorry. Perrault's story is most notable because it took all the traditions of the Cinderella story that came before it, but then he integrated all the elements that have carried over and become so iconic. Most notably, the fairy godmother and the pumpkin turning into a coach. And then you need to fast forward nearly 300 years, well, more like 240 something. And then that's when they started making Cinderella movies, which is what we're here to talk about today. So today we are going to look at the best cinematic adaptations of the Cinderella story. Originally, this was going to be a simple top 5 countdown, but then when I was doing research for this episode and then rewatching what I consider to be the strongest Cinderella films, I realized, just like life, nothing is that simple. So instead of doing a top 5 countdown, I have decided to start my own award show called The Matters. I am going to award each Cinderella film an award in a category that best befits what its particular strength is. Think of this as kind of like the Academy Awards meets the Screen Actors Guild Awards, except the prize is this adorable mouse in this plastic glass slipper. We are going to start where all great award shows start. On the red carpet. I know I said I wasn't going to do a top 5 or 6 countdown, but when you're on the red carpet, what else is there to do but judge people's outfits? So before we move into the pretentious part of this video, we're gonna look at Cinderella's ball gowns and figure out which one's the ugliest and which one's the prettiest. Cheers. And I'm Matt, and welcome to the virtual red carpet for the Matters Awards, where we are looking at what's not through to what's hot for Cinderella's ball gown through film history. Coming in at number 6 on the Cinderella red carpet, the worst look as voted by Instagram users following my Instagram account at YipChuck, we have Belinda Montgomery as appearing in the 1969 Muppet special, Hey Cinderella. Montgomery is wearing a Lorelei Fritz original. Lorelei Fritz is known for her work with the CBC, specifically through General Motors Theater. This look has been described as a hot mess, an 80s wedding dress followed by a horrified emoji, and tacky prom. Coming in at number 5, we have Leslie Ann Warren in the 1965 TV movie Cinderella. Apparently the 60s were a really bad year for Cinderellas to be wearing dresses. Leslie Ann Warren is wearing a George Whitaker design. George Whitaker is a notable TV costume designer known for his work on General Hospital and The Incredible Hulk. Some of the reviews that came in said, "I don't get the top of it, it doesn't feel royal in my opinion, and I never understood the little black things on her collar." What do you have to say about that review, Leslie Ann Warren?
Shut up!
Coming in at number 4, we have the most controversial look on the virtual red carpet tonight, Drew Barrymore wearing something from Ever After. Now, opinions on this look seem to be split right down the middle. You either love it or you hate it. Although, not to point fingers at specific demographics, but those that love it appear to have been between the ages of 8 and 15 when Ever After came out. Some of the positive reviews we have for this look include: it's the best because of the story behind the dress being an heirloom and the Da Vinci wings. The reveal was so magical, even if Drew's British accent made me cry. The prettiest, and not unlike her climactic look from Never Been Kissed. Then on the other hand, you have people who say it looked like a beat-up comforter from a homeless shelter. Yes, that's an exact quote.
I am what she says.
Number 3, we have Brandy from the 1997 made-for-TV version of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, wearing a blue dress designed by Ellen Mjorjnik, also known as the costume designer of Hollow Man. Number 2, we have the gown from the iconic 1950 Walt Disney animated feature production of Cinderella, as designed by supervising animators Mark Davis, Eric Larson, and Les Clark. This dress is described as being just magical, having the most princess vibe, and having the best color and elegance. Fun fact, it's often misconstrued as being blue. However, the dress is not blue, you are all wrong. And the number 1 look on the Cinderella virtual red carpet, Lily James in Kenneth Branagh's 2015 Cinderella. As Kat Bernardi so eloquently said, the original Disney set the standard for every princess ball gown, but the 2015 ball gown brought it to life. And of course, it's no surprise that this is the Cinderella dress that tops the people's list. Of all the Cinderella films that have been made, Kenneth Branagh's 2015 Cinderella has a full studio budget behind it. And so, great artists such as 3-time Academy Award-winning costume designer Sandy Powell were able to put their talents to work to bring to life one of the most iconic pieces of clothing in literary history. The dress has debatably 3 iconic moments. 1 is its arrival at the ball, 2 is when it's dancing, 3 is when it's running away. And even when you read interviews with Sandy Powell, where she's talking about what went into designing the dress, she specifically designed this look for silhouette and for movement. Movement was the most important part aside from the silhouette. I wanted it to look gorgeous as she was running away. I didn't want it to look sad and drag behind her in a heavy lump, hence the many layers of fine fabrics that could all move together. That concludes our session on the virtual red carpet. Now we're going to throw it over to you, Matt, for the proper award show. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the first ever Matters Awards. I am going to highlight what I personally feel to be the best cinematic adaptations of Cinderella. The winner for Best Picture might shock you. The first award we're going to be giving out is the Kids' Choice Award. I know that's not a real award, but honestly this is more of an honorable mention. And that goes to... Hey Cinderella!
Hey, Cinderella!
Hey, Cinderella.
Hey, Cinderella!
Yes?
This is probably one that you're not familiar with, but you should be. Hey Cinderella was a made-for-TV production. It was a 1-hour special produced in 1969 through a partnership with CBC, so it's Canadian media, and I don't know why that wasn't covered in my Canadian media class that I had to take while studying film at York University. Now, obviously, Hey Cinderella wasn't going to win any Emmys, but it's notable for the following reasons. First of all, it's hilarious. There's this incredible through line where the fairy godmother is like a 2-bit cabaret magician who can't even manage to turn a pumpkin into a carriage, and she only ends up at Cinderella's place by mistake.
Are you a real magic fairy godmother?
Magic? Take a look at this. Ta-da!
It's the first time that Kermit was identified as being a frog.
I don't want to be turned into no coachman. I like being a frog. It's all I know.
The special really allows Jim Henson's unique brand of humor to shine. A type of humor that's accessible to kids but highly appreciated by adults.
I'll meet you guys over at Cinderella's in 5 minutes. I gotta go rent some horses.
Oh, thank you. And who is this Rudolph I remind you of?
Hello, I'm Cinderella's fairy godmother. You must be her wicked stepmother. And these are your ugly daughters. Oh.
And finally, this project brought together Joe Raposo, John Stone, and Jim Henson, who would very shortly collaborate on Sesame Street. So it could be stated that without Hey Cinderella, we wouldn't have Sesame Street, and then we wouldn't have the Muppets as we know them today. The next award is for Best Original Screenplay, and the matters goes to Susanna Garrett, Andy Tennant, and Rick Parks for Ever After, A Cinderella Story. Ever After is an interesting case because it does some things incredibly well, and then in other ways it totally misses the mark. If you want to paint in broad strokes, like Leonardo da Vinci designing wings so that Danielle can be a bird, you could attribute all of the hits for Ever After to the screenplay and all of the misses to the direction. The screenplay makes some genius adaptations to the Cinderella story. First of all is in the setup. Within the first 5 minutes of the film, not counting the nonsense prologue where the Queen of France talks to the Brothers Grimm, "Oh, you must wonder why a woman as old as myself is reading children's stories, but you must know I particularly enjoy the one about the little Cinder girl." Which, by the way, if you're touting yourself as being a historical fiction, why is the Queen of France calling in a meeting with the Brothers Grimm? She should have been talking to Charles Perrault. But I digress. Within the first 5 minutes of the film, we meet Danielle as a little kid. We see her meet her new stepfamily, and within seconds of meeting her stepfamily, her father drops dead. This is what it sets up for the rest of the film. From the Countess's perspective, from the stepmother's perspective, from Angelica Houston's perspective. The Countess's character is a woman who has 2 children. She's been widowed. She's coming into this marriage with absolutely 0 resources, and it's a marriage of necessity for her to live and to survive. All of a sudden, her one lifeline, which is Danielle's father, is dead. Now, with most past Cinderella adaptations, the transition from birth family into step family is either glossed over or it happens when Cinderella is significantly older. With Danielle, it happens on camera when she is literally still a child. So within 5 seconds of meeting the step family, all of a sudden they become her official guardians. And so for her, it's also a matter of survival. So once we move into the main action of the film, we have the Countess and Danielle fighting to survive. And that is an incredible setup for a film, which is not met even in the least by its direction. Ever After gives us debatably the best written Cinderella character of all time. Danielle has so many moments of not so subtle empowerment. I think the most notable being one of the best scenes in the entire movie, when Danielle and the prince are captured in the woods, and then the captors tell Danielle that she can escape free of harm with anything she can carry. She literally picks up the prince and takes off. Like, that's awesome. And I think the most human thing she does in the entire film is right at the end when the Countess and then Marguerite, the bad stepsister, are put on trial, and then they're about to be shipped off to the Americas, which apparently back then in the 1600s was just as bad as it is today. Danielle doesn't forgive them, but she doesn't punish them either. She wishes on them the same treatment that they have bestowed upon her. On the surface, this might seem like Danielle's way of forgiving them, but let's call a spade a spade. It is pure catharsis, and it's her way of getting revenge. Is it a morally sound choice? Is it a choice made by the ideal person that we all want to think of ourselves as? No, not at all. But it's incredibly truthful and incredibly human. Now, where this movie falls flat is the direction, and it's even a testament to how good the screenplay is that the movie can turn out so fantastic with having such thematically disjointed direction. More often than not, this movie falls into really bad melodrama or just classic 90s slapstick comedy.
These are my mother's. Yes, and she's dead.
Just for some context, this was directed by the same guy who directed the Olsen twins in It Takes Two with Kirstie Alley and Steve Guttenberg just a few years prior, and these movies are not that dissimilar. At the end of the day, Ever After isn't a bad movie, but it's a kid's movie. It has one very well-written character at the center, but everything surrounding it insofar as acting and direction is so overtly melodramatic. And so what you get is a really well-made kids movie that's masquerading as a mature adult historical fiction. Next up, we have the Matters Award for Best Cinematography, which will be going to Walt Disney's Cinderella, the animated one. Now you're probably thinking, but Matt, it's an animated film. How can that win for Best Cinematography? I posed that same question to the people who voted and allowed Avatar to win Best Cinematography. In all seriousness, there is no competition. The film is a visual masterpiece. How do you know? You could watch that film in any language. You could watch that film on mute and still understand coherently from start to finish everything that is happening. In addition to that, Cinderella is a perfect use of animation as an art form. Animated films need to embrace the magical possibilities of animation instead of trying to substitute for live action. You don't need to look any further than the dress transformation sequence to see how this is an animated masterpiece. You could pause this movie on almost any frame, print it, put it on your wall, and it would be an unquestioned work of art. And in fact, the artistry and genius behind the animation in Cinderella is responsible for the generations-long misconception that Cinderella's dress is blue. It's not blue. You're all wrong. I was going to cover why you were wrong in this episode, but that's a whole other episode. I'll put a link in the description below, and you can watch that and see why you're all wrong. And while we're talking about Walt Disney's Cinderella, we are awarding our very first Matters Award in the category of Excellence in Lead Acting. And that award goes to Eleanor Audley for the role of Lady Tremaine, also known as the evil stepmother. Eleanor Audley carries this movie, and after this film, she went on to voice two more iconic Disney characters, Maleficent in Sleeping Beauty and Madame Leota from The Haunted Mansion. She had such a distinctive voice, but her brilliance as an actor is how she was able to manipulate that voice to those three similar but very distinct roles. She's wild and unhinged as Maleficent.
All these years they've been looking for a baby. Oh! Oh!
She's mysterious and brooding as Madame Leota.
Call in the spirits wherever they're at.
And as Lady Tremaine, she's cold, she is calculated, and she holds her cards very close to her chest.
Hold your tongue. Now. It seems we have time on our hands.
But I was only trying to...
Silence!
Whenever I watch the film, anytime that character is on screen, I almost forget that I'm watching a cartoon, because her vocal performance blends seamlessly with the animated interpretation of that character. I would even argue that her work on this film was the first time we saw a collaboration between voice actor and animators of that caliber. Ultimately, she set the bar for all evil stepmothers to come. Next up, we have the Matters Award for Best Director of a Cinderella Motion Picture, and that goes to Kenneth Branagh for the 2015 Cinderella. Kenneth Branagh is perhaps best known for his breakthrough performance as Gilderoy Lockhart in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, but before that he rose to prominence as a Shakespearean actor and filmmaker. At the age of 29, he was nominated for Best Actor and Best Director for his adaptation of William Shakespeare's Henry V. He is the master of classical quirk. He knows how to adapt these old classic stories in a way that doesn't dumb them down but is still accessible and enjoyable by nearly everyone, and that's why he was the perfect pick for Cinderella. This is a director who understands story and who understands subtext, and Cinderella is a story that's about emotional abuse, bullying, and grief. And those are themes that Kenneth Branagh doesn't shy away from. He uses them as the foundation for a really beautiful film. Branagh gives this movie so much emotional depth. In fact, if Ever After is a kids' film masquerading as a film for adults, this is a very mature adult film masquerading as a movie for kids. The sheer size and scope of this movie is incredible. It's comparable to how Branagh approached Hamlet as a sweeping historical epic. Cinderella escaping from the ball is thrilling. It's basically like a high-stakes car race. It's like, am I watching Cinderella or Too Fast, Too Furious? I don't know. But technical mumbo-jumbo aside, Branagh is a director who understands acting. In fact, it's even been said that 90% of directing is just picking the right actors, and Branagh absolutely does that. I mean, Derek Jacobi is in a Disney movie. Who else but Kenneth Branagh is going to make that happen? So that's why it's no surprise that 3 out of the 4 Matters Awards for Best Acting Performances are awarded to this movie. Starting off with an award for Best Supporting Performance, and that goes to Cate Blanchett. Blanchett absolutely commands every second of screen time that she has. And she effortlessly toggles between being a grandiose costume villain and a subtle, conniving, manipulative genius. A lot of people praise the scene where she confronts Ella in the attic and says, "Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time," and then she goes into her life story. But if you want to really appreciate how brilliant she is as an actor in this movie, watch the scene between her and Stellan Skarsgård. It is the perfect blend of calculation, manipulation, seduction, and even weird, twisted joy.
Are you threatening me?
Yes.
The next award for Best Supporting Actor in any Cinderella film goes to Richard Madden as Kit the Prince. A lot of Cinderella films, especially in recent years, have grappled with the fact that the prince is a pretty passive character. He's just there as a prize to be won. Richard Madden's performance gives us the most emotional depth we've seen from any prince in any Cinderella film ever. Just watch the deathbed scene with Jarek Jacobi. That's all I'm saying. And finally, the best performance given by an actor in a leading role in any Cinderella film, it should be no surprise, Lily James. That's right. If Ever After gives us the best written interpretation of Cinderella, Lily James gives us the best performance. Without rambling too much, she taps into all of the grief that Cinderella has, and then she spends the entire film navigating that. It's a constant push-pull between what she's actually feeling and then her obligation to have courage and be kind. And she's playing the role as the classic ingenue that we all expect going into a Cinderella movie, except if anything, she's such a smart actor that she's presenting it as a front or almost as a coping mechanism for dealing with all of the awful things that she has to live with. What it really just comes down to is that Lily James is an incredibly intelligent, talented actor. Just watch the scene when she walks from the carriage into the ball. Normally, that's nothing more than the performer going from point A to point B, but she fills it with such a broad range of emotions, and it's perfect storytelling, and it's a perfect performance, and she is the best Cinderella to ever be on film. And now finally we have reached that moment that you have all been waiting for, and truth be told, if any of you have made it this far into the video, thank you so much for putting up with me. We are about to announce the winner for Best Picture, the absolute best cinematic adaptation of Cinderella of all time. The award goes to the 1997 TV production of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, starring Whitney Houston and Brandy. Cinderella has such a rich television history. Rodgers and Hammerstein first adapted the story into a TV musical that was broadcast live starring Julie Andrews in the 50s. Later on, it was revived and broadcast again on television starring Leslie Ann Warren. And then in the 1990s, Whitney Houston took the reins as executive producer and brought it back to TV for a new generation. And ultimately, she gave us what I consider the best Cinderella film of all time. Why? Here's why. The ensemble is incredible. This cast is fleshed out by some of the best character actors of all time. Anytime it cuts from one scene to the next, it's invigorated by the energy of these amazing performers that all have such perfect chemistry with each other. Whoopi Goldberg and Victor Garber balance each other incredibly.
If I were a young man, I'd...
Yes, dear?
Well, I'd be younger, wouldn't I?
Yes, dear.
The stepsisters balance each other perfectly because Vianne Cox is a brilliant physical comedian, and Natalie Desselle is just a hilarious character actor.
I want to dance at him!
Bernadette Peters is wickedly delightful as the evil stepmother.
You're common, Cinderella. Your mother was common, and so are you. That a prince would even consider taking you for his bride, it's laughable.
And if any of you have seen Chicago, Rob Marshall who I personally believe is one of the greatest directors we have right now, was responsible for the choreography and musical staging. He's a director who understands visual storytelling, but because his background is in choreography and in dance, he understands the importance of movement and in creating beautiful pictures. Just look at the ball scene. As a choreographer, he obviously knows how to make movement look beautiful, but where his genius comes into play is how he tailors that movement to the small screen. Everything is choreographed with an awareness of foreground, background, and kinetic energy moving through the frame, all servicing the story. Another thing that makes this perfect is the music. Rodgers and Hammerstein are the musical equivalent to Shakespeare. But, just like Shakespeare, it's easy to dismiss them just as something that's old and archaic. That's where someone like Whitney Houston comes into play. When you have a genius in their own right, reinterpreting classics, that makes for something truly magical.
And because these daft and dewy items keep building up impossible hopes, impossible things are happening every day.
Whitney wasn't just the fairy godmother. As an executive producer, she had so much say in the final product. She believed that every generation needed to have their own version of Cinderella, and what she created was stunning. I asked my Instagram following what their favorite version of Cinderella was, and the vast majority said this one specifically because of the diversity. For context, the bulk of my Instagram network are all performing arts professionals, falling within the demographic of, say, 20 to maybe 35 to 40. These are all people who grew up with this Cinderella as a part of their childhood. I'm not saying it's necessarily the reason that they went into performing, but it's so important just as a means of seeing that it's something that you can do, no matter who you are. And now, in addition to all of those points, this is why I think this is the best Cinderella film of all time. Like I mentioned, Cinderella is a story that at its heart is about emotional abuse, grief, and bullying. This is the only film that posits the question to Cinderella, why are you staying?
Before my father died, I promised him that we'd stay together as a family. Cinderella, this can't be what your daddy had in mind for you, baby.
I've dreamt about leaving so many times.
That's the problem with most people. They dream about what they want to do instead of really doing it.
And it takes the actions of going to the ball and seeing that she's worthy of a better life for her to realize that she's capable of making the choice to get up and leave.
Father, I know I promised that I'd never leave here. But after tonight, I don't see how I can stay. If you only knew how she's changed, you'd understand. I deserve better, Father.
The Cinderella story usually comes under fire because the main character is considered passive and somebody who just sits around and waits to be saved. And some films even play into that stereotype, as recently as the 2015 Kenneth Branagh, where Cinderella is locked into the attic and the narrator says that she's content to let her memories of the ball fade into a happy memory like those of her mother and father. And then other films try to answer that stereotype by building an entire movie around the empowerment of the character. This film is a perfect blend. It's a classic retelling of Cinderella, using beautiful music, incredible staging, a top-notch cast, and at its heart, it's telling us the story we all want to see, while teaching us a message we didn't realize we needed. Alright everyone, thank you so much for listening to me ramble about Cinderella films for the last half hour. Yes, thank you to you for listening as well, R2. This was a really fun video to make, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, good or bad, on what you thought about it, and on anything that you'd like me to examine in future videos. So please don't forget, leave a comment, like the video, subscribe, do any of the above. And if you're interested in knowing why Cinderella's dress is not blue, feel free to click right over there. Matt out.